Before we proceed to the Q&A session, I will deliver a short speech, if I may. I decided not to present the foundation at this point because the information about the foundation has been contained in your pink project booklets, which were made part of your conference kit. But since we have so many organizations here who are either NGOs or they cooperate with state institutions, well, they have all come here, and it is a great moment to stop and think, what is the place of for NGOs in archival institutions? We should also stop and think what that means for us, and also what it means for the Photography Archaeology Foundation that has been established in Mir 3 years ago and can definitely end up going different ways, so to speak. When after 1989, in post-communist countries, political conditions had finally enabled the proper operation of NGOs, NGOs began registering one after the other, and a lot of new ones were established. On the one hand, a lot of NGOs were established, and they are actually quite a natural phenomenon in any civic society, also because the socialism had been overthrown by NGOs, something we neglect to forget sometimes. But there is one other thing that we have to understand, that once democracy was established, that had been a time when we had to actually learn how to operate in those open structures. And possibly I should not be saying that here and now, but there were very well-known stories of foundations that had been made part of economic scandals, that had been a phenomenon that we keep sometimes paying for until this day. It is important because the time of learning how to operate in a democracy, it is something that is an ongoing process. Nevertheless, those first years had definitely undermined trust in NGOs. After 20 years, the confidence is back. This confidence is something we're talking about also because that seems to me to be the most important thing in terms of the symbolic capital or equity of NGOs. Today we have approximately 80,000 NGOs, associations and foundations registered. Possibly they are actually less in numbers because some of the registered ones ceased operating. In culture, those organizations rank third, which ultimately means that there is indeed a lot of them, and the involvement and engagement and commitment to the pro bono causes seems to be quite natural. On the one hand, we can definitely say that non-governmental organizations have made their way into culture in the public area. But actually managing an organization that forms part of archives and therefore forms new reality altogether, well, we are constantly asking to what extent can we find our place in the world of archives. Archives, well, possibly not ex definitione, but indeed it is true that the largest archives are state-owned, and they have their own rules to follow, very serious rules to follow. We have to definitely ask the question to what extent a small organization can have something to say. That is something that we constantly wonder, we constantly think about, and we are constantly wondering how to set up cooperation with state institutions, whether we should be developing those relations or rather become and stay independent. It seems to me that once we ask the question Why does culture need the third sector, and why do archives need the third sector? Well, I believe that the first and foremost, or the fundamental answer to us, stems from a deep conviction that the role of NGOs is to introduce a certain ferment, some turbulence, and this is exactly what we are doing. Consider the place that we are at now, the Brave New World. Cafe is being operated by Krytyka Polityczna, the political critique, and the Stanisław Brzozowski Association, and that is definitely, those are both sources of intellectual ferment. We had been operating the Foxal Cafe and the Island Foundation in Gdańsk and others. We could go on and on with listing those associations. We have been constantly part of organizations that refuse to accept the status quo, that constantly cause turbulence. Obviously, the great advantage of NGOs, of small NGOs, is that they are constantly very close to life, which ultimately means that we can notice certain problems that are invisible to others. I am also talking from the perspective of an individual who has been working for many years as part of a governmental institution, official institution. So I do know the difference between prestigious, quote-unquote, institutions and those who are actually closer to life. Thanks to the fact that NGOs are small, they can also remain more flexible. I'm talking about the conditions of operations. This is something that we are all aware of, and that carries advantages and disadvantages. Disadvantages include the fact that we sometimes do not have permanent offices or sufficient funds, but advantages include flexibility, and flexibility definitely gives rise to new ideas. So that is simply or another way of operating, so to speak. The obvious question is whether archives have a point of contact with the NGOs. Well, it seems rhetorical, but it is obvious that the answer is in the affirmative. We have the Karta Center working for ages now with NGOs. But the very fact that the Archaeology of Photography Foundation has been established and has been developing, it ultimately proves that there has been a need of for such an organization. The foundation has been set up to resolve a very specific problem, which had been difficult to resolve by state-owned institutions. What I'm after here is the situation of private archives. In case of photographic archives, that problem is a crucial one. Because we have quite a lot of family archives, which ties in with the fact that, those archives are often as not very interesting ones operating in art, and them being left where they are ties in with museum policy. Archives were never bought before, had never been bought before. Museums were not interested. That has now changed. Museums no longer think that negatives are yucky. But that is just the question of the couple of past years. And that holds true for the Museum of the Warsaw Uprising, for example. So a lot remains to be done. That goes without question. Another problem and another issue is that families who are heirs to archives, who consider archives their heirlooms, do not want to get rid of those archives for free, and museums cannot buy those archives. And sometimes it also happens that families do not want to let go of their archives for sentimental reasons. They want to hold on to the archives and also to have power over these archives. Families want to take care of the memory of the work of a given author who happened to be a family member. And that is definitely a great field for maneuver for NGOs. Museums have it very difficult in terms of dealing with collections that they do not own. The museums will take care of their own collections, and the same thing goes for archives. So that is of secondary importance, so to speak. The foundation was established, when I had been working as a curator of photography, of photographic exhibitions. I had encountered those problems on a very large scale. And to tell you the truth, when I had been working in Zachęta, a gallery of modern photography, I had nowhere to go. And to tell you the truth, a few people got together to establish a foundation to protect private archives, but without taking them over. We want to work on them and we want to open them up. If an archive is held by a family, usually that archive is closed, it is inaccessible. Usually news of such archives travels via the grapevine, and usually such archives are not available to the general public. We are trying to make those archives public by digitizing them and by generating or producing appropriate publications. It is also true that archives are a very demanding topic, and it is quite difficult for families to deal with archives themselves, especially if we are talking about single-person families. This is why I am really impressed by what the Hegemon's family had done. I am very impressed with the APAG solution. It is very interesting to listen to. We will never be able to probably turn ourselves into such an association, but it does make us aware that this is possible. Moreover, the third sector allows for diversification, which is hugely important in the sector that we represent. Nevertheless, the question arises whether that third sector, without proper financing, with the given the ever-changing criteria, ministerial criteria included, whether that sector will survive. So I do believe that there are a number of paths that we can take as NGOs. They also tie in with the ethics of such an organization. One of the ways forward is to develop to a certain extent, focus on a single archive or two, promote them, and act in a minimalist way. 2 or 3 individuals who would simply share an archive without a huge promotional machinery, without major projects. Another thing to do is to develop commercially, deal with business or paid. We obviously encounter, we have already been discussing whether it is morally acceptable to sell photographs, sell copyrights to the photographs we represent. I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. So I think that to a certain extent, we have to simply start thinking in a marketing way. Another way is that archives are demanding. So possibly, if an NGO is developing too fast, possibly we should consider re-engineering that institution. We should also consider the option of public-private partnership in culture, for culture. that is not something that is being discussed very often. It is usually referred to as the wasted opportunity in Poland. So that is definite. That it definitely opens further options for cooperation. A private-public partnership program would definitely allow us to resolve a number of problems that are impossible to resolve by either of the parties alone. Because obviously we have to remember that public institutions are limited by the Museums Act of Law and the Archives Act of Law by appropriate legislation. So once a partnership is established with an NGO, such an institution, a public institution, can deal with a number of things that they could not handle by themselves, whereas for an NGO, holding or preserving a collection in a repository in a building that is financed publicly is usually a very important thing. So we have established close relations with NGOs and with public institutions, and we have generated the next project, which is called the Archives Alive or Living Archives. The purpose of the project is to breathe some life into institutional archives. So it is the question of a number of other issues. So the point is that the path of how we can that we should follow is definitely a thing to consider. A very interesting example of such partnership is that of the Dextra collection in the Norwegian Museum of Technology. It is a unique situation because the Dextra collection is supported by a major banking foundation, a major bank. But that is a very good example of making a collection public and of introducing a mutual support mechanism, because that is a win-win situation for everybody involved. The bank, the foundation, the photograph owners, all and sundry, so to speak. So those are certain general reflections that we have been discussing following discussions with a number of individuals and institutions, and that is definitely a topic worth mentioning. Thank you.
Dobrze, mamy teraz czas na pytania i na dyskusję. Czy ktoś ma pytania? Does anybody have any questions?
I have a question to all representatives of archives. This is the question about two problems actually that were quite visible in your presentations. It is a question about access, because actually I found different attitude toward access. Some of you guarantee this free open access to archives. The others try to give this access only partly or after paying a certain sum. How do you think? What are opportunities, and what could you say about this access to the archives? What is most important in your institution?
Well, I can answer on behalf of us and the museum in Oslo, and we want people to have access to our archives and our collections. If people call us in advance, they can come and have a look. They can have a look at the archives as they are in as they are stored in the magazines if there are other institutions, museum institutions and such things. And on the website, you can go in and have a look at the pictures, and you can use the pictures for free for your own purpose. But if you are going to reproduce them and to print them and to earn money on them, we are taking fees. So the fees are for publications and not for if you want to have a picture in your own album of your grandfather. Yes, so that's what we mean to access. And during this spring, we have also taken away the watermark that was on the pictures on the website before, because we are going into this Creative Commons discussion. So we don't want to spoil the pictures by the watermark.
We have it since the beginning. We are trying to manage this question, and for us, we would so much like to have a money from the copyrights or from the photographs, but in the reality, we gave it for free, because always somebody comes, the last one, the Museum of Music in Prague, and this is a big state institution, and they needed photographs of Antonín Dvořák. We have the last one before he 1904 died, and we give it for free. Or we make the new prints of them, and we tried maybe to give some money for the new prints, but we would like to work on it and maybe to make like you explained last time, the special edition, or to help us to have a little bit money from this glass plates, because we needed it, because we have the people, they work on the restoration, but it's a always open question.
Just speaking for me, I agree that the archivist's credo is preservation and access, but certainly financial encouragement to keep the archive alive is a very important thing to note, especially in the case of institutions. But I pride myself on doing a lot of pro bono work for other archives, and hopefully that will lead it toward more access to more archives in the future.
Well, I think I already replied to this question, so I don't have what to add to this at all. So in our archive, so-called archive, you can take anything what we have. I always thought that it's not mine at all. So if I find something on a flea market or on the street, it doesn't mean that it's mine. I have it on my shelf, but I would like if you use it. So the access is free.
W naszym przypadku to jest tak, że naszym celem jest udostępnianie maksymalnej ilości archiwów prywatnych online. I tutaj internet jest absolutnie fenomenalnym rozwiązaniem, bo na to pozwala. I to, co spadkobiercy muszą nam zagwarantować, to, że do końca istnienia internetu licencje na udostępnienie darmowych zdjęć online będą, czy przy fundacji, czy przy jakiejś innej instytucji, której fundacja przekaże swój majątek w wypadku rozwiązania. I to mamy zapisane w statucie. I po prostu spadkobierca, jeżeli chce z nami pracować, to musi się do tego zobowiązać. Kwestie sprzedaży, to jest podobnie, co mówiła Zuzanna Majsterowa, to jest w teorii chcemy je sprzedawać, w praktyce zawsze dajemy je za darmo, albo prawie.
Yes, I have a question, especially to the collections which show mostly private photographies, which we have heard partly. What is your explanation? Why is it that, what is this miraculous power of private photographies, that they are the most private things, still they are interesting for the public? This they now organize themselves almost. They want to be organized in archival enterprises like you wonderfully do. It doesn't happen with private diaries, with private letters. What is it what is the explanation that the medium of the archive, both physically and in terms of a spectrality, ghosts-like inscription of light, how would you spontaneously explain this power of the medium of the private photography, which seems to be much stronger than objects or letters or other forms of expression?
It's okay. It's good. I look at the I look at the photograph, the archive as a time machine. It takes you there. I look at it as a connective piece, particularly in light of what I showed you. As a musician, to celebrate, you'll never be able to go back and see live. We only have a certain number of pictures of the Louis Armstrong and things, and to see other photographs of them, you get a different observation. It's also a very personal experience when you look at a photograph. So I mean, it's the audience brings things with it that if you were looking at somebody's personal diary, you wouldn't necessarily be able to respond to that in that way. But if you look at a photograph the subject is really your connective piece, and then what you bring to it. So.
Well, I don't think that, so I don't know this category what means private photo at all. So I know two categories, good and bad, that's all. So there are photos which are good and there are photos which are bad. So I don't think what means professional, amateur, homemade, private. So it's, even in our collection I cannot make categories like this because I don't know the original source, I don't know the photographer. So can happen that even, I don't know, Brassai photo I have, so, or Kertész or Kappa, so I don't know what do I have. So it's a kind of answer.
What is a bad photo?
Excuse me?
What would be a bad
Yeah, that's a long conversation.